Okay, I want you to picture something for a second. Imagine a single microscopic cell. It's got no brain, no nervous system, literally zero awareness of anything. Yet somehow, this tiny, solitary speck of life knows exactly how to multiply, differentiate, and organize itself. Step by step, it builds this wildly intricate biological network until it hits a staggering number: 170 billion. That is roughly the number of cells making up the human brain. But how? How does a single, mindless cell become a fully intelligent, conscious mind?
Well, to answer that, we're going to dive right into this explainer. Today, we're taking a journey through the incredibly dynamic, heavily fortified, and constantly adapting ecosystem that is sitting right inside our heads. We're not just memorizing anatomy here. No, we're exploring a bustling, living city where billions of distinct little entities work together to build literally every thought, feeling, and memory you've ever had. So, let's get into it. All right, section 1, the brain's origin. So to really grasp how this entire ecosystem functions, we've got to start with its construction. Like, how does the foundation of our internal world get built with such insane precision? Well, a recent breakthrough in developmental neuroscience revealed something absolutely mind-blowing. For the longest time, right, scientists thought brain cells relied entirely on these incredibly complex chemical signals to know where to go. But researchers actually discovered a surprisingly simple rule. Brain cells just stick close to their ancestors. Yeah, they literally use their lineage, think of it like their cellular family tree, as a sort of positional map. As the brain grows, cells sharing the same ancestor just kind of stay near each other. This lets the brain's massive, complex structure naturally organize itself without having to rely totally on chemical signals alone. It's a massive piece of the puzzle in understanding how one single cell maps out a whole organ.
Moving on to section 2, the protective barrier.
Okay, so once this massive city of cells is built, it obviously needs protection. Your central nervous system requires a strictly controlled, homeostatic environment. It has to be completely walled off from the chaotic, messy bloodstream flowing through the rest of your body. And this is handled by the blood-brain barrier. And let me tell you, this barrier is an exclusive club. Things we absolutely need to survive, water, oxygen, carbon dioxide, and lipid-soluble molecules, they breeze right through. But it blocks almost everything else. We're talking harmful toxins, large therapeutics, and get this, over 90% of small molecule drugs. No way they're getting in. How does it do it? Well, it uses these extremely tight seals between endothelial cells, literally called tight junctions, along with a specialized layer of guard cells known as astrocyte end feet. These guys basically wrap around the blood vessels and dictate exactly what gets in and what gets kicked out. But you might be wondering, what happens when those city walls are actually breached? In a healthy barrier, those tight junctions stay perfectly intact. They clear out metabolic waste, they block pathogens, everything runs smoothly. But a compromised barrier, that leads to some severe neurocognitive issues. Take HIV, for example. In HIV, viral proteins with names like TAT and GP120 actually go in and alter the barrier's tight junction proteins. This allows harmful compounds to just leak right in, causing serious cognitive dysfunction. Or look at Alzheimer's disease. Here, barrier dysfunction creates this terrible, damaging feedback loop. It basically fails to clear out a waste protein called amyloid beta. So that protein accumulates in the brain, which triggers even more inflammation, which then further destroys the barrier and absolutely devastates neural networks. It's a vicious cycle.
All right, that brings us to section 3, the communication network.
So, assuming our protective walls are healthy and doing their job, let's step inside the city limits and check out the bustling chemical communication highways running between those 170 billion cells. I mean, this right here, this is the very foundation of who you are. We're talking about neurotransmission, which is simply the transfer of information between neurons. Every single thought that pops into your head, every emotion you feel, every tiny movement you make, it's all just the result of billions of neurons talking to each other using chemical messengers across these microscopic gaps called synapses.
Let's actually break down the exact step-by-step sequence of one of these cellular conversations. It's pretty cool. First, an electrical message travels down the long tail-like part of the neuron, which we call the axon. Second, when that message hits the very end, it triggers the release of chemicals. These are your neurotransmitters. Third, these little chemical messengers float right across the synapse, that tiny empty space between the two cells. Fourth, they reach the receiving cell's dendrites and attach to specialized receptors. You can literally think of this exactly like keys fitting perfectly into locks. And finally, once the key turns the lock, boom, the message is officially passed on. After that, the neurotransmitters are either broken down or recycled to be used again.
And what's so amazing is that this process brilliantly illustrates how we actually learn and remember things. When you experience something brand new, neurons fire. But if you experience it repeatedly, those specific neurons start firing high-frequency signals, especially in a region of your brain called the hippocampus. This repeated rapid-fire action triggers something called long-term potentiation, or LTP. Basically, a flood of calcium rushes into the receiving cell and it physically adds more locks, more receptors, to the synapse. It also tells the sending cell, hey, release more keys. So the connection literally becomes stronger and way more sensitive. This physical, biological change right there at the synapse, that is the foundational basis for how we explicitly store facts and memories over days, weeks, or even a lifetime.
Which perfectly tees up Section 4, the miraculous adaptation.
This brings us to what I honestly think is one of the most awe-inspiring aspects of the human brain's ecosystem, its neuroplasticity. The brain is not some static, fixed object. It is constantly reshaping its own physical structure and function based on what happens in your life. Let's look at this super fascinating example. During adolescence, teenagers are faced with this incredibly tough job of navigating social rules, reading complex emotions, dealing with peers, all that stuff. To handle this, the brain really needs to optimize its social cognition circuits, mostly in the medial prefrontal cortex. But check out this amazing part. The biological trigger that physically insulates these brain circuits, a process called myelination, which basically speeds up signal transmission, is the social interaction itself. Meaning, just engaging in social experiences during those critical teenage years literally builds and insulates the physical brain hardware they're going to need to be socially adept adults. How wild is that? However, neuroplasticity isn't always a good thing. Sometimes it's actually maladaptive. Consider the brain activity of a left leg amputee. The specific area of the brain responsible for processing touch from that missing leg, in the somasensory cortex. Well, it goes completely quiet after the amputation because it's not getting signals anymore. So what happens? Active neurons from the neighboring thigh region actually extend their fibers and physically hijack the inactive leg region. Because of this totally new wiring, a simple physical touch to the amputee's actual thigh is mistakenly interpreted by the brain as a touch to the missing foot. It's a completely fascinating, albeit challenging, side effect of a brain that just won't stop rewiring itself. Now, speaking of how different brain regions function, let me ask you a question. Have you ever taken one of those personality quizzes that told you, oh, you're highly analytical, so you're definitely left-brained, or you're wildly creative, so you're totally right-brained? I mean, it's a massive cultural idea, right? But what does the actual science say about our brain's ecosystem? Well, the reality is, the whole idea of being strictly left-brained or right-brained is a complete and total myth. Now, yes, it is absolutely true that certain specific functions are localized, like language processing is predominantly handled on the left side, and the left side of the brain controls the right side of your body. That's true. But a massive 2013 University of Utah study completely debunked the personality myth. Brain scans clearly, indisputably demonstrate that both sides of the brain are equally active and engaged. They're constantly and seamlessly communicating back and forth, entirely regardless of whether someone is a highly creative artist or a strictly logical mathematician. We use the whole thing, folks. Moving to our final part, Section 5, the power of sleep. To keep this massive interconnected ecosystem of 170 billion cells running smoothly, the brain absolutely requires an intensive nightly maintenance routine. And sleep is fundamentally divided into two distinct phases, and both are completely vital. First, you have NREM, or non-rapid eye movement sleep. This phase is characterized by slow brainwaves and deep, deep physical restoration. Get this, this is when the brain literally shrinks its cells slightly. Why? To open up pathways so the glymphatic system can literally wash away the day's toxic metabolic waste. It's like a deep clean. Then we cycle into REM sleep. During REM, your brain activity goes wildly high, looking almost exactly like you're awake. This is when we dream vividly, and it's absolutely crucial for regulating our emotions, sparking creativity, and solidifying those memories we formed during the day. So when you actually get a full night's sleep, you are basically allowing your brain to fully optimize its neural networks. During this night shift, the brain goes in and prunes away weak, unnecessary synaptic connections, basically cutting out the static and noise. At the same time, it generates brand new neurons in the hippocampus to help you learn.
It flushes out those toxic beta amyloid proteins we talked about earlier, making sleep literally our greatest daily defense against neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's. The end result? You wake up with sharper focus, faster reaction times, and a highly improved prefrontal cortex that makes you significantly better at complex problem solving and decision making. So we've seen how the brain's cells map out their positions, build these massive protective walls, communicate through chemical highways, and literally deep clean themselves every single night. But hey, remember neuroplasticity? Simply by focusing on and learning the information in this explainer today, you have just fired new electrical signals. You've released neurotransmitters, and you have physically strengthened synapses right there in your own hippocampus. Your brain is this incredibly dynamic, living ecosystem that you actually have the power to shape every single day. So as you wrap this up and move on with your day, I want to leave you with one final question. Your brain just physically changed. So what are you going to teach it next?